The chain snapped. Sergeant Grant Mercer ripped the trident off her neck and spun toward 500 soldiers with it raised above her head like a weapon. "Fake SEAL," he roared, and the hangar shook with laughter. She didn't grab for it, didn't stumble, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, completely still, while 500 people laughed at the medal her husband died, wearing the medal she had pulled off his body herself. In the dark, on a burning offshore platform 3 years ago, Mercer was still grinning. He had no idea, none of them did, that was about to change. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe right now, follow every part until the end, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The laughter started in the front row and moved backward like a wave. It reached every corner of the hangar. 500 service members. All of them trained, all of them decorated, all of them watching a 41-year-old Army sergeant hold a scratched SEAL Trident over his head while a woman in plain camouflage stood in front of him and said absolutely nothing. Some of them laughed because it was funny. Some laughed because Mercer was laughing. And 20 years of institutional weight made his laughter feel like a signal. This is the correct response. Follow along. Some of them, a smaller number, though larger than they would later admit, didn't laugh at all. They watched her face. They watched the way she was standing. And something in the back of their minds sent up a small, quiet flag that they couldn't immediately name. Petty Officer Owen Beck, 23 years old, standing near the back of the formation with his communications gear strapped across his chest. Not loudly, not enthusiastically, but he laughed. He would spend a long time afterward wishing he hadn't. At the front of the formation, Sergeant First Class Grant Mercer was in his element. He had built his element carefully over 20 years. The way you build something you intend to last brick by brick, deployment by deployment, reputation by reputation. He was the kind of man that military institutions produce when they reward dominance without interrogating it. Tall, broad, physically formidable, 3 combat deployments. An instructor record that junior soldiers referenced the way people reference scripture, not always understood, but rarely questioned. Specifically, he had a gift for identifying the exact pressure point where a person's confidence was thinnest, and then pressing on it in public, where the audience made the damage permanent. He had been doing it for 20 years. He was very good at it. He had seen her the moment she walked through the side door. No name tape, no unit patch, no visible rank. A weathered field case that looked like it had survived things that field cases weren't supposed to survive. And around her neck, small chain, SEAL Trident scratched. Worn, the kind of worn that meant years of use in conditions that destroy things. In Mercer's mind, the calculation took approximately 3 seconds. Civilian evaluator. Probably academic. Got cleared onto the base because someone in an office signed a form without thinking hard enough about it. Wearing that trident because she thought it would give her credibility with operators. Or because she bought it somewhere and liked what it represented without understanding what it cost. He was moving before he finished the calculation. She was walking toward the command briefing area direct. Purposeful, no hesitation when he stepped into her path. She stopped. She looked up at him, and that was the first moment. The first moment. If anyone in that hangar had been paying the right kind of attention when something didn't fit. Because the look she gave him was not the look of a person who has been intercepted by someone much larger and much more imposing than themselves. It was not alarm, it was not uncertainty, it was patience. The specific practiced patience of someone who has seen this before and is waiting for it to finish. "Where did you get that?" Mercer said. His voice was loud. "Made sure of that." The nearest 2 rows of the formation had already turned. "Get what?" she said, quiet. No aggression, no deference. Just a question answered with a question. In a voice that gave him nothing to grab onto, that he said. And he reached out and grabbed the trident. The chain held for a moment. Then the clasp snapped, and the trident was in his hand. And he raised it above his head, and the hangar erupted. Fake SEAL, the words bounced off steel walls, off concrete floors, off the faces of 500 people who were all, that moment, deciding simultaneously what kind of person they were going to be. "You think wearing this makes you one of them?" Mercer continued. He was grinning now, the broad, easy grin of a man performing for an audience that has already decided he's right. "You think you can just walk in here with a prop around your neck and, 'Let me have it back,'" she said. Same voice. Not a demand, not a plea. Statement of fact delivered, with the absolute certainty of someone who knows the outcome of a conversation before it begins. "Where did you buy this?" Mercer pressed. He turned to the formation. Working the crowd now, comfortable in the role. "Somebody checked the parking lot. I think a civilian wandered in from the visitor's center." Laughter. Genuine, rolling, the kind that feeds itself. He opened her field case without asking. She didn't stop him. She watched him do it, which was somehow more unsettling than resistance would have been. Inside a military-issue rifle, old enough that some of the junior personnel didn't immediately recognize the model. Hand-drawn maps on paper so worn that the fold lines had become cracks. A compass with a cracked crystal face and a sealed black envelope with no markings, no addressee. No classification stamp, nothing. Mercer held up the rifle. He held it the way you hold something you've already decided is worthless, loosely. Away from the body, like it might have something wrong with it. Old gun, he said. Paper maps, a Trident she bought at a surplus store. He looked at the formation with an expression of theatrical bewilderment. Somebody tell me, we didn't invite a history teacher to a combat exercise. The laughter was at full volume now. She looked at him. Not with anger, because anger would have given him something. Not with humiliation, because humiliation would have confirmed his narrative. With something that had no good name in the vocabulary of military hierarchy. Something that was not quite pity and not quite patience and not quite certainty, but contained elements of all three. You can look at everything in that case, she said. You won't find anything that doesn't belong there. What I can't find, Mercer said, is a reason for you to be in this operational area. I'm going to need you to take your props and your outdated equipment and get out before I have you escorted. A pause. She reached up and took the Trident from his hand. He let her take it. He had already made his point. He had the audience, he had the momentum. What she did with a piece of metal she'd bought somewhere was irrelevant. She held it in her palm for a moment, just looked at it. Then she closed her fingers around it and looked at him. An insignia tells people what you completed, she said. Your choices tell them whether you deserved it. Mercer opened his mouth. The main hangar doors opened. Rear Admiral Miriam Stroud did not make entrances. She arrived. There was a distinction. An entrance was theatrical, a performance designed to produce an effect. Stroud's arrivals were simply the moment when she became present in a space, and the space rearranged itself around her without being asked. She was 58, 36 years of service. She had gray at her temples that she had stopped noticing approximately 15 years ago. She walked with the unhurried directness of a person who has long since stopped being interested in how their walking appears to other people. The hangar came to attention in a wave that moved from front to back in under 4 seconds. 2 aides flanked her. Behind her came Captain Julian Cross, 37, lean, with the look of a man who had been told difficult truths by people he trusted and had made peace with the process. Cross had a reputation in joint operations circles for being the rare officer who told you exactly what he observed and then let you do what you wanted with it. He had a good read rate. He was rarely wrong about people. He was already reading Mercer when he came through the door. Stroud walked directly to Mara Ellison, not to Mercer. Not to the formation, not to the command platform. Directly to the woman standing in plain camouflage with a scratched Trident now closed in her right fist. She reached into her service jacket and produced a sealed envelope. She held it out. Open it, Stroud said. Mara broke the seal. She removed a single document, 1 page. Dense with print, with a header that the nearest people in the formation could read clearly if they were looking. Operational Command Authorization, Northern Sentinel. She read it in approximately 8 seconds, folded it twice, placed it in her chest pocket. Stroud turned to face the formation. Every person in that hangar was already still. The kind of still that happens when 500 people's nervous systems simultaneously detect that something real is occurring. This facility will come to order, Stroud said. Her voice needed no amplification. What you are about to hear is classified at a level that most of you do not hold. You are being read in because operational necessity requires it. You will not repeat what you hear outside this building until you receive clearance. That is not a request. Nothing moved, nothing made sound. The officer standing beside me is Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison, Stroud said. She holds full operational command of Northern Sentinel. Every person in this formation, regardless of rank, branch, or personal assessment, answers to her for the duration of this operation. The silence had a physical quality now, like pressure. Lieutenant Commander Ellison is the sole surviving commander of Echo 9. A pause. Stroud let it breathe. For those of you who have never heard that name, that is deliberate. Echo 9 was a classified maritime rescue unit. Their operations were removed from public record by design. The reasons will become clear to some of you in the next 72 hours. Mercer had not moved. He was standing 4 feet from Mara Ellison, which was 4 feet closer than he wanted to be. And he was looking at the sealed envelope now sitting in her chest pocket, and he was doing the very specific kind of arithmetic that men do when they realize, in public, in front of an audience they were performing for 30 seconds ago, that they have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Stroud looked at him. Sergeant Mercer, ma'am, flat. Correct. Bloodless. The trident that Lieutenant Commander Ellison is carrying belonged to her commanding officer and husband, Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison, killed in action 3 years ago during a classified rescue operation. Stroud's voice did not change temperature. It didn't need to, the words did the work. She has worn it every day since his death. The pause this time was longer. You held it above your head in front of 500 service members and called it a prop. The silence after that sentence was the loudest thing Grant Mercer had ever heard in 20 years of standing in loud places. Said nothing. There was nothing to say. Every possible response he could construct made it worse. And he was experienced enough to know it, and knowing it was a brand new kind of miserable. Owen Beck, in the back of the formation, had stopped breathing. Mara had not looked at Stroud during any of it. She had been looking at the formation face by face, section by section, the quiet systematic assessment of someone mapping a new operational environment. Now she looked at Mercer. We have 72 hours, she said. Her voice was the same as it had been, since she walked through the door, quiet, controlled, and completely without performance. A missing aircraft, an injured crew, a storm system that will close regions if we wait too long. I don't need an apology. I need you ready to do your job. She picked up her field case, looked at the formation. If everyone is finished deciding what I look like, she said, let's find out what we can do. The operational briefing took place in the hangar's secondary conference room 40 minutes later. 12 officers and NCOs, 3 specialist technicians. Captain Cross at Mara's right, Mercer at the far end of the table, arms crossed, jaw set, doing the thing that certain men do after public humiliation, converting it into a resource, banking the anger for later use. Mara spread Aaron's hand-drawn maps across the table. They were extraordinary maps. The kind that someone makes not because they were ordered to, but because they understood that good information saved lives and bad information killed people, and the difference between the two was often the quality of the cartographer. Every contour line was precise, every landmark was notated, every known hazard was marked in red. Cross leaned forward to look at them. These are remarkable. He was meticulous, Mara said. She said it without effect, not as grief performance. Deflection, just as a true thing stated plainly. Captain Cross, I need confirmation on the mission parameters. The aircraft beacon is transmitting from grid Bravo 7. Is that correct? According to the processed output.
Yes.
According to the processed output, Mara said, and the way she said it made Cross look up. What about the raw transmission data? A pause. Raw frequency logs? Cross said. I want to know if the primary and backup beacon systems are transmitting simultaneously, Mara said. And if they are, I want to know if they're transmitting from the same location. The table went quiet. People were running calculations, and the calculations were producing uncomfortable results. Mercer uncrossed his arms. The beacon is in the mountain corridor, he said. That's what the data shows. We have a crew to recover and a device to retrieve. We cannot afford to sit here and speculate about whether... What's the prevailing wind direction in Bravo 7 right now? Mara asked. Mercer stopped. Excuse me, the prevailing wind. Northern corridor. Current conditions. He looked at her for a moment. Then northeast. Approach from the south staging area. Duration? 4, maybe 5 hours. 38 hours. His voice had gone flat. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like the destination. So if we commit our primary force to the southern approach, Mara said, and the storm shifts south by 12 hours ahead of projection, which happens in this region approximately 40% of the time, we will have deployed the majority of our personnel into terrain that will be inaccessible. Before they can complete the mission, nobody spoke. I've run that corridor in winter conditions, Mercer said. I know that terrain better than anyone in this room. I know you do, Mara said. And your knowledge of it may be exactly what saves lives in the next 72 hours. I'm not questioning your capability. I'm asking for confirmation before we commit. She turned. Petty Officer Beck. Owen straightened in his chair as if a current had passed through him. The RC-14 reconnaissance variant, Mara said. Beacon system, standard emergency locator. Ma'am. Backup system. As he stopped. The thing moving across his face was a specific kind of cognitive interruption, the moment when a brain that has been operating on one set of assumptions suddenly encounters information that doesn't fit. The backup system transmits on a secondary frequency. If both systems activate simultaneously, the signal profile, Mara said. You'd see a frequency split in the raw data. Owen's voice was changing, picking up speed, sharpening. If the primary and backup are transmitting from different locations, we can triangulate both signals, Mara finished. And we'll know whether the beacon has been displaced. Every head at the table turned toward Owen Beck. Owen looked at Mara, then at the table, then at Mara again. I need the raw transmission logs, he said, not the processed output. Captain Capt Cross. Mara said. I'll have it in 40 minutes, Cross said, already moving. Mercer was staring at Owen with an expression that he hadn't fully assembled, something between disbelief and a grudging recalibration that he was not yet ready to allow himself. "A communications tech," he said, "just audible, just loud enough." Mara turned her head slightly. "Problem, Sergeant, no problem." "A beat. Just thinking about how we explained to 500 operators that we're holding the whole exercise because a 23-year-old ran a frequency analysis." Owen Beck looked at the table. Mara looked at Mercer for a long moment, not with anger. With the same patience she had used in the hangar, the patience of someone who has stopped needing the other person to understand immediately and has accepted that some understanding only arrives through experience. "Petty Officer Beck," she said, still looking at Mercer, "what's the primary failure mode in military operations where experienced teams miss critical information?" Owen hesitated. They stop asking questions they think they already know the answer to. Because asking looks like uncertainty. And uncertainty looks like weakness. The room was very quiet. "Right," Mara said. She looked back at the formation map. "I don't care what the right answer looks like. I care whether it's right." She picked up a marker and circled Bravo 7 on the map. "Sergeant Mercer, I want your team at the south staging area and ready to move at 1400. You will hold at the observation point here." She marked it. "And you will wait for Owen's signal analysis before you advance into the corridor." "Ma, that is a direct order." Mercer met her eyes. "Acknowledged," he said. He didn't hold. 1400 hours his team deployed from the south staging area. 1530 they crossed the observation boundary. By 1550 they were inside the mountain corridor, moving toward the pass, because Mercer had done the math the way Mercer always did math in terms of what he could achieve, and what it would prove and how the story would read afterward. He had envisioned it clearly, his team reaching the aircraft location first, securing the crew and the navigation device, returning to base with the mission complete before Mara's signal analysis finished processing. Clean, decisive, demonstrative. The kind of outcome that rewrites the narrative of how the day began. The beacon suddenly jumped, not moved, gradually jumped. 9 kilometers east, toward the coast. Mercer had 2 seconds to understand what that meant. Then the first explosion detonated beneath the snow. The avalanche simulation wasn't simulated. The charges buried under the unstable snowpack at the pass entrance were live, not military ordnance, but commercial demolition charges, the kind used in mining operations, the kind that someone with access to the facility's maintenance records could plant in a location that an experienced operator would be certain to pass through. Snow came down fast and heavy and without negotiation. 2 of his soldiers were hit by debris, not buried. Not quickly, but down and disoriented. Communications equipment took a direct impact from a secondary slide. Mercer's radio went to static, then silence. He had 12 people in a mountain pass with 2 injured, no communications, and an approaching storm. He had exactly the situation he had been ordered to prevent. Back in the operations center, Mara received Owen's frequency analysis at 1547. She read it once, set it down, stood still, seconds, the particular stillness that precedes very fast action. "The beacon isn't in the corridor," Owen said. His voice had gone careful. "Ma'am, the beacon is at the coast. Moving, it's on a vehicle. How long has it been moving?" "Based on the frequency log, approximately 2 hours. 2 hours. The beacon had been displaced before the exercise even began. Before they had received a single briefing. Before Mercer's team deployed. This had been in motion before any of them walked into the hangar this morning. "Owen," she said. "The secondary transmission, the one layered under the beacon signal." "What cipher?" He looked at his screen, then back at her. The look on his face was the look of someone who has found information they were genuinely hoping not to find. "Exercise security communications," he said. "Internal Black Ridge channels." The room felt different. Smaller. "Who has access to those channels?" Owen swallowed. "The exercise security director." Mara closed her eyes. 1 second, just one. When she opened them, she was already pulling on her cold weather gear. "Cross." Her voice was completely steady. "Get me the mining survey maps for the northern corridor. There's an abandoned ventilation system, 1970s construction, that runs under the main pass. If Mercer's team went into the lower section, that system is our access route." Cross moved without being told twice. "Ma'am," Owen started. "I know about the beacon," she said. "I know what it means. Right now 12 people are in that pass because I didn't secure the observation point myself, and that is my failure to correct. Keep running the frequency analysis. Don't share what you find with anyone except Cross. No one. Not until I'm back." She looked at him for a moment. "You did the right thing," she said. "Asking the question nobody else thought to ask. Remember what that felt like." Then she went through the door. The ventilation shaft was not built for human beings. Aaron's maps had been drawn in summer. He had surveyed the system during a joint training rotation 18 months before his death, meticulous as always, marking every branch point and access panel and structural concern in his small, precise handwriting. In summer conditions, the eastern drainage route was the clear choice. Wider, more stable, better ventilated. In autumn, after the first seasonal debris accumulation, it was a navigation trap. Mara found this out 34 minutes into the extraction, at a branch point that didn't exist on the summer survey because summer conditions had buried the northern entrance under a meter of drift. She went east. She realized the mistake 6 minutes later when the passage narrowed to a point that her gear wouldn't clear. She backed out, took the northern branch, found Mercer's team 12 minutes later cold. 2 men down, communications dead, the most experienced operator she had been given to command sitting in the dark in an abandoned mining shaft because she hadn't accounted for seasonal variance in a survey she trusted too completely. Mercer saw her light before he saw her face. "Commander." His voice was flat and stripped of everything except information. "Can everyone move?" "Jameson's knee is bad. Cortez took a head impact, probably concussive but conscious. Everybody else is operational. Eastern drainage route is blocked by debris accumulation. We go northern branch to the coast access. It adds time, but it clears the collapsed section." She was already consulting the map, already marking the route. "Mercer, I need you forward. Take Jameson. I'll cover the rear." He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved. He put Jameson's arm over his shoulders and started moving, and he did it without argument, without qualification, without the performance of resistance. It was the most significant thing he had done all day. He would not understand that for some time yet. When they reached the surface, all 12 of them, both injured soldiers, stable, Mara stopped the group before they moved toward the staging area. She stood in front of Cross and Mercer and the assembled team. "I navigated from a summer survey at a branch point," she said. "The northern entrance was buried, and I didn't account for it. We lost 23 minutes. That error extended Jameson's time in cold conditions. That is on me." She looked at Rodriguez, the unit engineer, who was standing at the edge of the group. "You saw the northern marker when we passed it." Rodriguez met her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Next time say it. Whatever the situation, whatever the rank differential, say it. I cannot give you permission after the fact to tell me what I needed to know." Rodriguez nodded once, slowly, like someone filing something in a permanent location. Mercer was watching her. He was watching her the way people watch things that refuse to fit into the categories they've built for them, not with hostility now, not with the easy contempt of the hangar, but with something more uncomfortable than either. With the beginning of a question he wasn't ready to ask. She had come into a collapsing ventilation shaft to get his people out. She had admitted in front of those same people exactly what she had done wrong. She had credited a junior engineer for information she should have found herself, and she had done all of it without once mentioning who she was, what she had survived, or what she was owed. In 20 years, Grant Mercer had never once seen a commanding officer do those things. Started to say something. His radio crackled back to life. Owen's voice came through tighter than it had been before. The voice of someone who has found the thing they were afraid of finding and has run out of time to be afraid. "Commander Ellison." The secondary transmission. "It's ma'am. Coming from inside the base. And it just went active. Whatever Pierce is doing, it's happening right now." The mountain pass was silent. Mara looked up at the storm system building at the edge of the northern skyline, massive and dark and moving faster than the models had projected. 38 hours had just become considerably less. "Move," she said. They moved. The laughter died, but the resentment didn't. That was the thing about humiliation, the public kind. The kind witnessed by 500 people. It didn't disappear when the moment ended. Transformed, it went underground, found new shapes, traveled through the ranks in whispers and sideways glances and conversations that stopped the moment an officer walked past. Mercer felt it the second he walked out of that hangar. Not shame, not yet. What he felt was the specific, burning indignation of a man who believes he was right and was made to look wrong by circumstances beyond his control. He replayed the sequence in his mind, the Trident, the laughter, the way he had held it up, and each time he replayed it, he found a new reason why what he had done was reasonable. He had no name tape, no rank, no unit patch. Any experienced operator would have questioned her. He had been doing his job. The Admiral's reaction was theater. Political theater, the kind of performance that senior officers put on when they needed a symbol, and had decided she was it. That was the story he told himself walking to the equipment bay. That was the story he told his team 30 minutes later, quietly, in the back corner of the preparation area where the cameras didn't reach, and the senior officers didn't linger. "Political appointment," he said. "They needed a face. She's the face. Doesn't mean she knows what she's doing in the field. His team listened. Most of them nodded. Because Mercer had been right before many times, about many things, and the habit of trusting his read was deeply grooved by years of experience that had earned that trust. One of them, a younger operator named Vasquez, didn't nod. He looked at the floor instead, which was a small thing, nearly invisible. But Mercer noticed it and filed it away with the cold precision of a man who tracks loyalty the way accountants track numbers. What Mercer didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that 3 of his team members had independently looked up Echo 9 in the 30 minutes since the Admiral's announcement. They had found nothing, not redacted files, not classified summaries, not even a reference number, nothing, as if the unit had never existed. Which, as any of them could have told you, meant one of 2 things. Either it genuinely hadn't existed, or someone very senior had worked very hard to make it look that way. 2 of the 3 said nothing about what they'd found. The third, a quiet signals specialist named Tran, who had been in the military long enough to know that total absence of records was itself a kind of record, pulled out her personal notebook and wrote down 3 words. She would not show those words to anyone until the 2nd day. By then, they would matter enormously. Meanwhile, in the operations center, Mara was already working. She had set up her station at the secondary command table, not the primary platform, which she could have claimed by authority, but the secondary table near the window, where the raw data terminals were clustered. Cross had raised an eyebrow at the choice. He hadn't explained it. She didn't explain most things initially. This was, as it turned out, one of the qualities that some people would come to trust in her, and others would use as evidence against her. Silence in command is either wisdom or arrogance, and which one it is depends almost entirely on whether you trust the person being silent. Mercer's team did not trust her. Most of the 500 did not trust her. Captain Cross was reserving judgment, which was the most she could have reasonably expected from anyone who had known her for 4 hours. And Owen Beck, sitting at his frequency analysis terminal with the raw transmission logs Cross had obtained, was operating in the particular mental state of someone who has been told they matter and is terrified of proving otherwise. He was working through the data line by line, the way he'd been trained, systematic, thorough, no shortcuts when the first anomaly appeared. He stared at it for a full minute before he trusted what he was seeing. Then he looked up and found Mara watching him from across the room. She hadn't said anything. She was simply watching him the way experienced commanders watch the people they've tasked, not with pressure, not with impatience, but with the quiet attention of someone who wants to know what a person does when they think no one is measuring them. "Ma'am," Owen said. "Tell me, the primary beacon is transmitting from grid Bravo 7. That's what the processed output shows. That's what everyone sees." He turned his screen. But the raw frequency log is showing a secondary transmission on the backup system. Different location. The split started. He checked the timestamp. 4 hours and 17 minutes ago. 4 hours and 17 minutes before the exercise briefing began. Mara looked at the screen without touching it. How far apart? Primary signal. Secondary signal. Owen paused. Approximately 9 kilometers east. Coastal grid. Moving, yes. Ma'am. Steady movement northeast at approximately 40 kilometers per hour. That's a vehicle, Mara said. Yes, ma'am. The room had gone quiet. Cross had stopped typing. 2 other technicians were looking at Owen's screen from across the room, running the same calculations, arriving at the same destination. Someone moved the beacon, Cross said. Not a question. Someone moved it before Northern Sentinel began, Mara said. Which means whoever did it knew the exercise schedule, knew the aircraft deployment, and had physical access to the navigation device before it was reported missing. She straightened. The aircraft isn't where the beacon says it is. The crew isn't in the mountain corridor. Everything we were about to commit 500 people to was built on a signal that was designed to be wrong. The weight of that landed differently on different people in the room. For Cross, it was tactical, immediate, actionable, requiring a rapid restructuring of the operational plan. For the 2 technicians, it was professional, the particular discomfort of people who process data and have just learned that the data they processed was corrupted at the source. For Owen, it was something more personal. He had been the one to find it. The scared kid with the radio, as Mercer had called him, had found the thing that no one else had looked for, because no one else had thought to question what the processed output was telling them. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt the weight of what came next. Because the secondary transmission, the one layered beneath the beacon signal, encrypted on internal Black Ridge security channels, was still running in the background of his analysis. And what it was telling him was considerably worse than a displaced beacon. He hadn't mentioned it yet. He was still staring at it, hoping he was wrong when Mara's radio crackled with the call from Mercer's team. Not an emergency. She was moving before the transmission finished. Cross caught her arm at the door not to stop her, but to hand her the mining survey maps he'd pulled from the archive. He took them without breaking stride. "Owen," she said over her shoulder. "Ma'am. Keep running the secondary transmission analysis. Don't stop. Don't share what you find with anyone except Cross. I mean anyone." She was through the door before he could respond. He looked at the screen. Then he started typing faster. The mountain pass was everything the mission briefing had said it would be, and several things it hadn't. Mara found the ventilation shaft access point in 14 minutes using Aaron's summer maps, went in without hesitation, and spent the next 37 minutes in a space that was never designed for a human being moving quickly in cold weather gear toward people who needed to be found. She found them. She brought them out. And then she stood in the open cold and told 12 operators and one captain, without preamble or qualification, exactly where she had gone wrong. The 23 minutes lost to the wrong tunnel branch. Jameson's extended exposure. Her decision to trust a survey she hadn't verified against current conditions. All of it stated plainly in front of the people it had affected. Mercer stood at the edge of the group and said nothing. He was doing the internal arithmetic that men like him do when reality has delivered information that doesn't fit their existing model, not the quick arithmetic of a person updating their beliefs, but the slow grinding arithmetic of someone who built an identity around a set of assumptions, and is now being asked to revise the foundation. She had come for them. She had admitted she was wrong. She had done both things without asking for credit for either. In 20 years, across 3 combat deployments and hundreds of training exercises, Mercer had served under commanding officers who were brilliant, and commanding officers who were adequate, and commanding officers who were dangerously incompetent. He had seen commanders take credit for enlisted decisions and blame subordinates for command failures, and perform accountability in front of cameras while protecting themselves from its actual consequences. He had never once seen a commanding officer do what Mara Ellison had just done. It didn't fix anything between them, but it cracked something, a hairline fracture in the narrative he had been building since the hangar, through which a different kind of light was beginning. Very slowly and very unwillingly to enter, his radio came back to life. Owen's voice. Tight, controlled, the voice of a person delivering information they've triple-checked because they desperately needed to be wrong. "Commander Ellison, the secondary transmission. It's active. Coming from inside the base." Mara looked at the sky. The storm was building faster than projected, massive. "Dark, the kind of system that doesn't negotiate." "Cross," she said. "Get everyone moving now." They moved. Back in the operations center, the secondary transmission had stopped being theoretical. Owen had the full picture now, or as much of it as the data could give him, and the picture was this: for the past 6 hours, someone inside Joint Training Center Black Ridge had been transmitting on internal security channels to a receiver that was now moving northeast at 40 kilometers per hour along the Alaskan coast. The transmissions were encrypted, but their timing was not. They aligned precisely with 3 specific windows in the Northern Sentinel schedule: the pre-exercise equipment check, the beacon deployment, and the moment Mercer's team had been dispatched to the mountain corridor. Someone had known when the corridor would be occupied. Someone had known because someone had been told. Owen had a list of personnel with access to exercise security communications. It was a short list. He had been staring at one name on that list for 11 minutes when Mara came through the door. She saw his face. "Major Pierce," Owen said. "Exercise Security Director." His access credentials were used to transmit on the internal channels at all 3 windows. He turned the screen. "And ma'am, the last transmission. It went out 4 minutes ago. Right after your radio call from the mountain pass. Someone had been listening to their operational communications. Someone had known when 12 operators were trapped, when communications were down, when the operations center was working with reduced personnel, while its commanding officer was in a ventilation shaft. Someone had used that window. What did the last transmission contain? Mara said. I can't decrypt the content, Owen said, but I can tell you the transmission length and frequency suggest it was a coordinate package. A location update. For what? Owen looked at the coastal movement data on his secondary screen. The vehicle carrying the navigation device changed direction 6 minutes ago. No longer heading northeast. He pointed to the map. Heading for the harbor. Cross came through the door 30 seconds later, still pulling on his jacket. He read the room in 3 seconds. Mara's stillness. Expression, the data on the screens, and said nothing. Waiting. Pierce is running an extraction, Mara said. Navigation device is already off the base. The rescue exercise was cover movement. Personnel, communication traffic. Everything we were doing out there was noise to hide what was happening at the coast. How long has this been in motion? Cross asked. Since before we walked into the hangar this morning. Cross absorbed that. The ambush in the mountain pass. Not a simulation malfunction, Mara said. Planted charges. Designed to trap Mercer's team. Which means someone knew exactly where they would be and exactly when. Pierce knew, Cross said. Because Mercer told the pre-exercise security briefing that he planned to move on the corridor as his first objective. And because I gave Mercer a direct order not to advance, Mara said, which Pierce calculated Mercer would ignore. The room was very quiet. He used Mercer's pride as an operational tool, Cross said.
Yes.
Which means he knew about the dynamic between you and Mercer before the exercise started. He helped create it, Mara said. She said it without drama, without anger, with the flat, clear tone of someone reading a map. This is where we are. This is how we got here. This is what the terrain looks like from this position. Cross looked at her. You knew Pierce would be here. It wasn't quite a question. Mara didn't answer it directly. She moved to the main communication terminal and pulled up the base alert system. She started to type the authorization for a Level 2 security lockdown, the kind that would seal the harbor, ground all vehicles, and alert every senior officer on base simultaneously. The terminal rejected her credentials. She tried again. Rejected. She looked at Cross, base communications network. Cross was already checking. His expression told the story before his words did. Down, not degraded down, hard shutdown about 90 seconds ago, Pierce Owen said, very quietly. The operations center had no external communications, no alert system, no way to reach the harbor, the security stations, the airfield, or the 487 personnel currently dispersed across the training area. They were for all operational purposes alone, and then the explosion hit, not in the operations center. Somewhere below them, deep in the facility's infrastructure, a sound that was less a bang than a physical pressure, a concussive thump that traveled through the floor and the walls and the furniture and the bodies of everyone standing in the room. Owen grabbed the edge of his terminal to stay upright. Cross had his sidearm out before the sound finished. Mara was already at the door, pulling it open, looking down the main corridor. The corridor lighting had shifted backup power, yellow-white, instead of the standard fluorescent, casting everything in the particular pallor of emergency systems. A soldier was running toward them from the east wing. Young, out of breath, eyes wide, with the specific expression of someone who has just witnessed something they have no framework for. Commander Ellison. The soldier stopped, breathing hard. The underground briefing facility, the East Complex. Unsealed, remote lock, all external doors. The Admiral is inside, and the senior command staff. We can't, he swallowed, we can't get to them. Mara turned back into the room. Cross was looking at her. Owen was looking at her. The two technicians who had been quietly working at their stations were looking at her. Outside, somewhere in the facility, 500 service members were dispersed across training areas and staging points and equipment bays. With no communication, no alert, and no idea that the exercise they had been running for the past 6 hours had just stopped being an exercise. And the only person who had seen all of it coming was standing in a room with no radio. And a base she couldn't call. Owen, Mara said. He straightened. The backup frequency transmitter. The portable unit in the equipment locker. Can you get a signal out on a non-standard band? Something Pierce won't have shut down because it's not in the official communications inventory? Owen's mind moved fast. You could see it on his face, the rapid internal search. Cross-referencing the moment of arrival, the old VHF unit. It's analog, it's not connected to the base network. Pierce would have had to physically destroy it to kill the signal. Where is it? Storage bay. Corridor. Go, she said. Cross, I need every piece of information you have on the underground briefing facility. Access points, ventilation, structural, everything. She was already moving toward her field case. And I need someone to find Mercer. Cross stopped. Mercer. He knows this facility better than anyone on base, Mara said. He's run every tunnel system, every maintenance route, every access point. I need that knowledge, especially after everything, Mara said. He's good at his job, Captain. That was never the question. She pulled Aaron's maps from the field case, read them on the table. The underground briefing facility was there, marked in Aaron's small, precise handwriting with a notation in the margin. Secondary ventilation connects to harbor maintenance channel. Flood risk in storm conditions. Storm conditions that were, according to the last meteorological report before the communications blackout, approximately 9 hours ahead of original projection. The underground facility would begin to flood in approximately 4 hours if the storm hit early. The Admiral and the senior command staff had 4 hours. Less if Pierce had planned for that too. Mercer came through the door 3 minutes later. He was still in his cold weather gear from the mountain extraction, and he was moving with the focused energy of a man who has received incomplete information and is running on operational instinct while his mind catches up. Stopped when he saw Mara's expression. Not the maps, not the room. Her face. What happened, he said. And for the first time since the hangar, his voice held no performance, no resentment, no positioning. Just the direct, stripped question of an operator who has walked into a changed situation and needs the truth. Mara, all of it. Fast, precise, no wasted words. Beacon displacement, the secondary transmission. Pierce's credentials, the sealed underground facility. The Admiral. The communications blackout, the harbor extraction. The timeline. Mercer listened without interrupting, which was not something he was known for. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. The harbor maintenance channel, he said. The one that connects to the east ventilation system. You know it? I've run it twice. Winter maintenance drill 2 years ago. He looked at the map. At Aaron's notation, it floods in heavy storm surge. If the storm front is moving faster than ours, Mara said. Maybe less. Mercer looked at her. Pierce planned for that. Yes, he trapped them in a facility that will flood if we don't get there before the storm hits. Yes, another second of silence. And Pierce knows the facility layout, Mercer said. He knows every access point we'd use. He'll have his people positioned at the obvious entries. Which is why we're not using the obvious entries, Mara said. Mercer looked at the map again. At Aaron's handwriting. He didn't ask who had drawn it, he seemed to know. Somehow that asking was not the right move. There's a maintenance crawl space, he said. Along the north face of the facility, below the standard access level. Pierce wouldn't know it, it's not in the official blueprints. It was added during a structural reinforcement 2 years ago. The contractor used it during the pour and sealed it. But the access panel is still there. You're certain I supervised the reinforcement, he said. I watched them seal it. Mara looked at him. Then you're leading the extraction team. He met her eyes. The complicated reckoning that had been running behind them since the mountain pass had not resolved. It was not the kind of thing that resolved in hours, or perhaps in years. But something had shifted in it. Some weight had redistributed. What are you doing while I'm in the crawl space, he said. Finding Pierce, Mara said. And making sure he doesn't reach that vessel. Owen's voice came through the doorway. He had found the VHF unit. Gotten it running and was transmitting on the non-standard band. Ma'am, I've got Captain Reyes in the north training area. She's got 40 personnel and they're mobile. Tell her to secure the harbor approach, Mara said. Nothing leaves the coast. Nothing. And the base personnel? The rest of the 500? Mara was already moving. Aaron's maps in hand, cross at her shoulder. Tell them the exercise is over, she said. Tell them what's real. Owen looked at the old VHF unit in hand's analog, off-grid, completely invisible to Pierce's network shutdown, and thought about how Mara had known exactly what question to ask and exactly who to ask it to. Then he started transmitting. Outside, somewhere beneath the facility, the storm was coming faster than anyone had projected, and Nolan Pierce, who had spent 3 years planning this moment, who had manipulated a sergeant's pride and a commander's grief and an entire exercise structure to create this exact window, was about to discover that the woman he had designed this trap to destroy was the same woman who had survived the last trap he had built for her, in the dark on a burning platform 3 years ago, with a wound in her side and her husband's trident in her hand. She had directed that rescue for 11 hours. She hadn't stopped then. She wasn't stopping now. Owen's voice was still transmitting on the VHF unit when the second explosion hit. This one was closer. East wing below the main corridor, a deep structural sound that traveled up through the floor and into the soles of everyone's boots and didn't stop vibrating for a full 4 seconds. Somewhere in the facility, something load-bearing had been compromised. Owen grabbed his terminal. Cross grabbed the doorframe. Mara didn't grab anything. She stood completely still and listened to the way the sound decayed, reading it the way a person reads a sentence for what it said and for what it was trying not to say. That wasn't a charge, she said. Cross looked at her. Meaning too diffuse, too long. That was a valve-pressurized system, probably the main water feed to the east complex. She was already moving toward the structural diagram Cross had pulled. Pierce is accelerating the timeline. He's flooding the facility now. He's not waiting for the storm. Cross checked his watch. Less than 2 hours, Mara said. Maybe 90 minutes if the pressure feed is running at capacity. The arithmetic in the room shifted immediately, visibly the way arithmetic shifts when the variable you built your plan around has just changed. Mercer processed it fastest. The crawl space access if the water is already rising in the east complex. The maintenance channel will backfill. We have maybe 40 minutes before it's impassable. Then you have 40 minutes, Mara said. And Pierce has to be above ground, Mara said. He needs line of sight to the harbor for the final extraction. He's coordinating the vessel approach personally. The transmission timing tells us that. Which means he's at the radar station. Cross looked at her. That's exposed. He'd have personnel. He'd have contractors, Mara said. Not military. His own people brought in under the exercise security framework. They'll be armed, but they won't be operators. She looked at Mercer. Your team is the best extraction force on this base. I need them in that crawl space with you. Mercer looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite the complicated reckoning of earlier. This was faster, cleaner, the look of a man who has run the numbers and arrived at a place he didn't expect. You're going to the radar station alone, he said. With Cross. 2 people, he said, against Pierce's contractor team. The contractors are watching for a large force, Mara said. 2 people coming from the maintenance approach on the north face won't fit their threat model. And if it does... She looked at him steadily. Then we improvise. Mercer held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and pulled the door open and said, over his shoulder, without looking back, "Don't get killed before I can tell you I was wrong." He was gone before she could respond. Owen looked up from the VHF unit. His face was doing several things simultaneously: processing, calculating, afraid, and trying not to show the afraid part. He was 23 years old, and he had found the evidence that blew this operation open. And now the person who had told him he mattered was about to walk toward armed contractors with 1 other person, and there was nothing he could do about any of it. "Ma'am," he said, the secondary transmission from Pierce. Before the blackout, the last coordinate package he sent. I couldn't decrypt the content, but I ran the transmission length against known encryption formats. He turned his screen. It wasn't just a location update. The data volume is consistent with a full authorization code package. Mara stopped. For what system, she said, I don't know yet. But whatever it unlocks, Owen swallowed. Pierce sent it to the vessel 9 minutes ago. The room was very quiet. He's already transferred the access codes, Cross said. Not all of them, Mara said. Her voice had gone very still. The navigation device alone isn't enough. The full system requires a biometric authorization command level. Senior officer. He needs someone from inside the underground facility to complete the transfer. Cross understood it before she finished the sentence. He's not flooding the facility to kill the Admiral, he's flooding it to negotiate with her, Mara said. Rise fast enough, she authorizes the codes to stop the water. She has no way of knowing the transfer can't be reversed once it's complete. The weight of that sat on everyone in the room differently. For Owen, it was the particular horror of watching something that seemed like one kind of threat reveal itself as a completely different and more sophisticated kind of threat. Like picking up a stone and finding it was a hinge. For Cross, it was tactical rage controlled, channeled immediately into action, but genuine rage at the manipulation of it. Pierce had built a mechanism that used the Admiral's instinct to protect her people as the instrument of her own compromise. For Mara, it was recognition. This was how Pierce operated. It was what he had done at the offshore platform 3 years ago, used the impulse to protect, the instinct to save as the vector for the trap. He didn't defeat people through superior force. He defeated them through their own decency, turned against them at the precise moment it was most costly. He had done it to Echo 9, he was doing it now, Owen, she said. Can you get a signal into the underground facility? Anything, any frequency, any band. The facility is hardened, Owen said. Standard RF won't penetrate, but he stopped. The internal calculation was visible. The structural reinforcement Mercer mentioned, the north crawl space. If it was added after the original hardening, it might not be fully shielded. If I position the VHF unit directly above the access panel, can you reach them? I don't know, he said. Probably not clearly, maybe enough to transmit. Whether they can receive, he shook his head. I don't know, try, Mara said. If there's any chance the Admiral receives even partial transmission, she needs to know not to authorize the codes, whatever Pierce offers her. Whatever he threatens, she does not authorize the codes, and if she can't hear me. Mara picked up her field case. Then we reach her before Pierce does. She looked at Owen, really looked at him. The way people look at each other when the situation has stripped away everything except what's true. You found this, she said. Everything we know, everything we can still do, it starts with what you found. Don't forget that. Owen nodded. He didn't trust his voice enough to use it. Mara and Cross went through the door. The corridor outside was on backup power. Yellow, white, and stark, and it was empty in the particular way that military facilities go empty when something has gone wrong, and the people who remain don't yet know which direction the wrong is coming from. Somewhere in the east wing, water was moving through pipes and passages that weren't designed to carry it. Somewhere below, the Admiral was in a sealed room with rising water, and a man on a radio offering her a choice that wasn't a choice. And somewhere above them all, at the radar station on the north face of the facility, Nolan Pierce was watching a vessel move toward the Alaskan coast and waiting for the last piece of his operation to fall into place. He had been waiting 3 years for this. He didn't know that the woman he'd left for dead on a burning offshore platform had been waiting the same amount of time. Cross said while they moved, "You're going to tell me at some point." "Tell you what, everything." Echo 9 Aaron, how long you've known it was Pierce? Why Northern Sentinel was really built. A pause. I've been running this joint rescue unit for 2 years. You deserve to know what I walked into. You do, Mara said. Ask me when this is over. I'm asking now, she glanced at him. They were moving fast, and he was keeping pace without effort. And his face held the specific determination of a man who has decided that not knowing is more dangerous than knowing. 3 years ago, she said, still moving, my unit was tasked to extract American personnel from a compromised research platform in the Barents Sea. Intelligence liaison provided coordinates. The coordinates were wrong by design. We went into an ambush, she said it with no decoration. Flat. Fast. The way you say things that have been said inside your own head so many times they've lost their surface texture. We got the hostages out. We lost 5 people. Aaron was one of them. Cross was quiet for a moment. Pierce provided the coordinates. Yes, and you've spent 3 years building the case. Meant 3 years gathering the evidence that would put him in front of a military tribunal without any possibility of the case being closed for operational security reasons. She turned a corner. Northern Sentinel was designed to draw his network into motion. When a system is moving, you can see it. When it's still, you can only speculate, and the 4 things you didn't account for, Cross said. He looked at him. He knew you were coming, Cross said. He turned the trap around. He knew I was building a case, Mara said. I don't think he knew the full design of Northern Sentinel. But he suspected he was being drawn out, so he prepared a counter-operation, a beat. He's very good. You sound almost like you respect him. Respecting someone's capability is different from excusing what they do with it, she said. Pierce is operationally brilliant. He's also responsible for the deaths of 5 people I loved and the compromise of classified systems that cost 3 other operations their cover. Both things are true. Cross processed that the Admiral. She knows the full history? She knows enough. Does she know Pierce is the one who sealed her in? She will, Mara said. If we get there in time. They reached the North Maintenance approach. The access point was exactly where Aaron's maps said it would be, a panel in the facility's north face infrastructure, low to the ground, unmarked except for a small contractor's notation in the upper right corner. Cross covered the corridor. Mara tested the panel. It opened. Beyond it, the radar station access corridor ran northeast for approximately 200 meters before opening into the station's lower level. Cold air came through the opening, and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a radio, someone transmitting. Voice low and controlled. Pierce. He was already at the station. Mara went in first, Cross followed. They moved without lights, which was slow and required complete attention, because the passage was narrow and uneven, and darkness in a confined space has a specific physical quality it pushes back. Crowds, it makes every sound carry farther than it should. At the 100-meter mark, Mara stopped. Cross nearly ran into her. She held up a hand, listened. The radio transmission stopped. In its place, a different sound boots on metal grating, close enough to count the steps. One person moving away from them, toward the upper level, one person. She held up 2 fingers, then shook her head. Not 2 people, 1. Cross frowned, held up his hands in a question. She shook her head again. She didn't know. And not knowing in a confined space with no communications and no backup was a specific kind of dangerous that required you to move anyway. They kept moving. The radar station's lower level was a single large room lined with equipment racks and technical infrastructure, most of it dark on backup power. One terminal was active, transmitting a coordinate display showing the harbor approach in real time. The vessel was visible on the screen, a contact moving steadily toward the coast, still approximately 6 kilometers out. Pierce was not in the lower level. He was at the upper station. They could hear him now, clearly, his voice traveling down the equipment shaft from the level above. He was speaking to the vessel, giving approach instructions. Precise, professional, the voice of someone completing a mission that has gone mostly according to plan. Mostly. Hold at 4 kilometers until I confirm the authorization code, he was saying. The Admiral will have made her decision by now. Water's been rising for 20 minutes. She's practical. She'll prioritize her people. A pause. The vessel responding too distant and too distorted to make out words. If she hasn't authorized by the time you reach the 2-kilometer mark, Pierce said, we proceed without the secondary package. The primary device is sufficient for the buyer's requirements. Cross looked at Mara. The Admiral hadn't authorized. Mara was already looking at the equipment rack, specifically at the power distribution panel at its base, which controlled the active terminal's transmitter array. She moved to it. Cross kept his attention on the shaft. The transmitter array controlled the coastal radar feed, the feed that was guiding the vessel to the harbor. She studied the panel for approximately 15 seconds. Then she looked at Cross and held up 3 fingers. Countdown. Cross understood. On 1, she pulled the main breaker on the transmitter array. The active terminal went dark. The coastal radar feed dropped. On the vessel 6 kilometers offshore, the approach display would have just gone blank. Above them, Pierce's voice stopped mid-sentence, a silence. In very controlled station respond. Station, do you copy? Nothing, because there was no one to respond. Technical failure, Pierce said to the vessel or to himself. I'm resetting from the upper terminal. Stand by. Boots on the metal grating. Moving fast now, coming down. Cross positioned himself to the left of the shaft exit. Mara to the right. Both of them still, which in a dark room with backup lighting reduced to a low amber is very close to invisible if you know how to hold yourself. Down the shaft. He was 46 tall, with the bearing of a man who had spent a career in intelligence, always slightly more composed than the situation called for, always calculating the next move while managing the current one. He was carrying a sidearm. He moved toward the terminal without looking left or right, because the terminal was the problem and the terminal was where his attention went. It was a small tactical error, the kind that cost you. Cross moved. Pierce heard him a half-second too late, turned, brought the sidearm up and stopped when he registered Mara standing 6 feet to his right, with her weapon leveled at his center mass. He looked at her. She looked at him. 3 years of everything that had happened between them occupied the 3 seconds of silence that followed. Commander Ellison, Pierce said. His voice was steady. He was genuinely good at this. Put it down, she said. You understand that if I do, the people on that vessel will not receive extraction coordinates. They are not military personnel. They are private contractors who believe they are completing a legitimate commercial operation. If they attempt to navigate the harbor approach without radar guidance in these storm conditions, put it down, Major. You'd be responsible for. The vessel has been tracking a radar feed I just killed, Mara said. They stopped moving the moment it went dark. They're holding position, and they'll continue holding until someone gives them new coordinates. Which will not be you, she paused. Cross has already transmitted the Harbor Authority's emergency frequency to Owen, transmitting on VHF to Captain Reyes's team at the coast. By the time you complete this sentence, the harbor is sealed. Pierce looked at Cross. Cross said nothing. His expression said everything. Pierce looked back at Mara, and something shifted in him, not collapse. Not surrender, but a specific, precise recalculation. The kind that a person makes when they have run the operational math and arrived at the conclusion that the variable they didn't account for was the one that mattered most. You've been running this for 3 years, he said.
Yes, Northern Sentinel.
Yes, and all of it, the exercise design, the personnel selection, the beacon deployment, all of it was to draw my network into motion. Yes, a beat. You're better than I gave you credit for, he said. I know, she said. Put it down. He put it down. Cross had him secured in under 10 seconds, the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before and does not find it dramatic. Pierce did not resist. He stood with his hands restrained and looked at Mara with an expression that was not quite defeat. It was more complicated than defeat. It was the expression of someone who has spent years underestimating a specific person and has finally, at the worst possible moment, understood the extent of that error. The Admiral, Mara said. The facility flood? Where's the shutoff? Pierce said nothing. Mara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. There are people in that facility who had nothing to do with you or me or Echo 9. There is a shutoff. Tell me where it is. Pierce's jaw tightened. Major, she said, and her voice dropped a register, not louder. Quieter. The way a sound gets quieter right before it becomes something else entirely. I have been waiting 3 years to stand in front of you. I have enough evidence to end your career, your freedom, and your network in every operational theater you've touched. I do not need you to cooperate to accomplish any of that. I am asking you where the shutoff is, because there are people drowning in a room below us, and your answer will be the first true thing you have done in 3 years. It will not save you. It will simply be true. And I am giving you the opportunity to do one true thing before this is over. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Sub-level maintenance panel, Pierce said. East Junction. Corridor B, red handle. It's mechanical, Pierce said it quietly. Not connected to the network shutdown. Cross looked at Mara. He nodded. He pulled out his radio, the portable unit, analog, still functional, and transmitted the location to Owen in 3 words. Then they waited. The wait was 47 seconds. Long enough to breathe. Long enough to feel the weight of what 3 years and 5 dead teammates and a scratched Trident had been building toward. long enough for Mara to look at Pierce and understand, fully and without comfort, that stopping him would not return what he had taken. Never did. It just meant he could not take anything else. Owen's voice came through the radio, shut-off confirmed. Water is stopping. Mercer's team is at the facility. They're in the crawl space. Contact in approximately 6 minutes, Cross exhaled. Mara reached into her pocket and closed her hand around the trident. Pierce watched her do it. That was Aaron's, he said. Yes, Don't, she said. Not with anger. With something colder and more final than anger. You don't get to complete that sentence. He closed his mouth. Below them in the sealed underground facility, Rear Admiral Miriam Stroud had been sitting in 8 inches of water for 22 minutes, with 5 senior officers around her when the water stopped rising. She had not authorized the codes. She had refused twice, once when Pierce's voice came through the facility intercom offering to stop the water in exchange for authorization, and once when the water reached the level of the chairs and one of the junior officers in the room looked at her with the particular expression of someone who is trying very hard not to ask a question they think might be wrong to ask. He had looked at that officer and said, "We are not authorizing anything, ma'am." The water Commander Ellison designed this operation, Stroud said. She has been building toward this moment for 3 years. I trust her design. A pause, and I trust her. The water kept rising for 4 more minutes. Then it stopped. Then Mercer's voice came through a crack in the north wall, thin, distorted, barely intelligible, transmitted on Owen's VCHF unit from directly above the access panel, saying 4 words. We're coming in now. Admiral Stroud looked at the officer who had been about to ask the question. Told you, she said. The crawl space access was tight enough that Mercer's broad shoulders barely fit, which meant the extraction was neither fast nor graceful. But it was thorough. Mercer and his team moved every person in that facility through the North Passage in 11 minutes, which was fast enough that the junior officer who had looked at Stroud with the questioning expression later said he had no idea how anyone moved that quickly in a space that small. What he didn't see was what it cost Mercer to move that fast. His shoulder had taken a compression impact in the mountain pass that he hadn't reported. The crawl space made it worse. By the time the last person was through the access panel, Mercer was moving on a capacity conditioning and something that is not accurately described as adrenaline. It's older than adrenaline and simpler, and it has no good name. That's possibly the decision to not stop. When the Admiral came through the panel and stood up in the maintenance corridor, Mercer was leaning against the wall, breathing with the controlled deliberateness of someone managing significant pain. Stroud looked at him. Are you injured, Sergeant? No, ma'am, he said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman who has been in the military for 36 years and knows exactly what no, ma'am means when a man is leaning against a wall breathing like that. Good, she said, and moved past him toward the operations center, because there was still a great deal left to do, and the storm was getting closer by the minute. Mercer watched her go. Then he pushed off the wall and followed. In the radar station, Cross was completing Pierce detention with the help of 2 of Captain Reyes's personnel who had reached the station through the harbor approach. The vessel offshore had dropped anchor when the harbor sealed and was not going anywhere. Pierce stood secured and silent, which was the most dignity available to him at this point. He had decided to take it. Mara was at the active terminal. Cross had restored power to the equipment rack, transmitting coordinates and status to Reyes's team. The navigation device had been intercepted at the harbor by Reyes's people. Still in the vehicle, driver detained, chain of custody established. It was over. Or it was almost over, the way things are almost over when the operational crisis has ended, and what remains is the accounting, which is in some ways harder than the crisis itself, because the crisis gives you something to move toward and the accounting gives you only what was. She was finishing the transmission when she heard boots in the corridor. Not Pierce's contractors. The gait was different. The cadence different. The specific rhythm of someone she had learned to recognize over the past several hours as belonging to a man who moved with his weight forward, always slightly ahead of his own center of balance, as if he were perpetually about to charge something. Mercer came through the door. He looked at Pierce, secured in the corner. He looked at Cross. He looked at Mara. His shoulder was wrong. She could see it in the set of his posture, the slightly abbreviated movement of his right arm. He was injured. He had completed the extraction and the tunnel transit and the corridor approach with an injury he had told Stroud he didn't have. He said nothing about it. The Admiral is mobile, Mercer said. All personnel from the facility are out and moving toward the operations center. No fatalities. 2 people need medical attention. Thank you, Mara said. He looked at her. Then he looked at Pierce. Something moved across Mercer's face that was complex and not fully readable, the particular expression of a man who has just understood, at the level that understanding actually lives in the body rather than the mind, how he had been used. Pierce had seen him in the hangar, had read his reaction to Mara, had looked at the dynamic between them and calculated that Mercer's pride, correctly provoked, would do more damage to the operations command structure than any external force could manage. Pierce had used him, had watched him grab a dead man's trident and hold it over his head in front of 500 soldiers, and had thought, yes, this is useful. Mercer looked at Pierce for a long time. Pierce looked back without expression. He knew, Mercer said, before the exercise started. He knew I'd go for the corridor without waiting. He knew I'd fight the order. He set the charges knowing exactly where I'd be. Yes, Mara said. Because I told him exactly where I'd be. In the pre-exercise security briefing, his voice was flat. I sat in a room with the man who was planning all of this and told him my operational plan. Yes, Mercer was quiet for a moment. My team was in that pass because I told him where we'd be, he said. And I ignored your order because he stopped. Because I gave it, Mara said. He didn't deny it. And Pierce counted on that, she said. He looked at you, and he saw someone he could point in a direction, because he understood that you were already pointed that way. That's not a character flaw, Sergeant. That's an operational vulnerability. There's a difference. Mercer looked at her. There's a difference, he said. But it doesn't change what I did know, she said. It doesn't. The storm hit the coast 40 minutes later, 3 hours ahead of the final projection, massive and indifferent, the way Alaskan storms are indifferent, without malice or mercy, simply with the weight of physical reality doing what physical reality does. Inside the facility, 500 service members moved through the storm's arrival with the organized efficiency of people who have had a very instructive 12 hours and are not inclined to waste what they learned. Owen sat at his VHF terminal with the frequency logs open, compiling the full transmission record that would become the evidentiary backbone of everything that followed. Stroud sat in the operations center drinking coffee that someone had found and made, reading the initial report that Cross had drafted in the 45 minutes since Pierce's detention. Pierce was in a secured room with 2 guards and his own silence, and Mara stood at the north window of the radar station, after everyone else had cleared out, holding Aaron's trident in her palm and looking at the storm moving over the Alaskan coast. She had been in this moment before, not this exact moment, but the shape of it. The space after, the quiet that arrives when the thing you have been moving toward for years is behind you, and the future has not yet arrived, and there is nothing to do except stand in the interval and feel the full weight of everything it cost. 5 teammates, Aaron, 3 years of invisible work. A mission that nobody would ever fully know about, because the parts that mattered were classified, and the parts that could be told were incomplete. She closed her fingers around the trident. Cross appeared in the doorway behind her. She didn't say anything. After a moment, she turned. Ask me the rest of it, she said. Later, he said. Right now, the Admiral wants you in the operations center. All 500 personnel are assembled. He paused. And Sergeant Mercer is asking if he can speak with you before you go in. She nodded. Mercer was in the corridor outside the operations center, standing with his good shoulder against the wall, holding his injured arm slightly away from his body, in the unconscious ways of someone trying to minimize contact with pain. He saw her coming and straightened. I need to say something, he said. Okay, she said. He was quiet for a moment, organizing it, the specific silence of a man who is not accustomed to finding words for internal things, and is trying to do it accurately rather than quickly. In the hangar, he said. I looked at you and I made decisions about what you were before I knew anything true about you. And then I used that decision to perform in front of 500 people. He paused. That's what I did. I'm not explaining it, I'm just saying what it was. Mara looked at him. And everything after, he said. The corridor, ignoring your order. The things I said about you to my team. Every one of those things made it easier for Pierce to do what he did. Needed the command structure divided. I handed him the division. Yes, she said. I don't know how to. He stopped. Started again. I don't know what to do with the fact that the thing I'm most ashamed of is also the thing that got people hurt. Those two things are usually the same thing, Mara said. That's why shame is supposed to be instructive. The question is what you do with the instruction. He looked at her for a moment. How did you know I'd follow orders in the crawl space? When you gave me the extraction, you couldn't have known I'd do it right. I knew you were good at your job, she said. That was never in question. She held his gaze. I also knew that you'd finally run out of reasons to make it about us. He absorbed that. It was his, she said simply. I know. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. Not with warmth, not with coldness, with the particular clarity of a person who has decided to see someone exactly as they are. "I know," she said. Then she went through the door. The operations center was too small for 500 people. They spilled into the main corridor, the adjacent staging area, the equipment bays on either side standing in clusters, still in cold weather gear, some of them wet from the storm that had hit the coast 40 minutes ago and was now pressing against the facility walls with the patient, indifferent force of Alaskan weather doing what it does. Nobody had told them to assemble. They had assembled anyway, which was its own kind of information. Word travels in military facilities the way water travels. It finds every crack, every gap, every space that isn't sealed, and it moves through those spaces faster than any official channel can manage. By the time Mara came through the operations center door, every person on that base knew three things. The exercise wasn't an exercise. The Admiral had been trapped underground, and Commander Ellison was the reason she was out. What they didn't know, what most of them were still trying to construct from fragments, was the full shape of what had happened. Who Pierce was, what Echo 9 meant, why Mara Ellison had walked into that hangar this morning without a name tape or a unit patch or any visible evidence of who she was and what she had done. They were about to find out. Stroud was already at the front of the room when Mara entered. She was standing with the particular posture of someone who has spent 22 minutes sitting in 8 inches of cold water and has decided, by act of pure will, not to let that be visible in how she holds her body. She had dry clothes, someone had found a spare uniform, but her hands, when Mara looked at them, still had the slight color that cold water leaves on skin. She had refused medical attention until every other person from the underground facility had been seen first. It was the kind of admiral she was. Mercer was standing at the edge of the room, injured shoulder still held slightly wrong. Cross was beside him, which was a spatial choice that said something. Cross had spent the last hour at Mercer's operational side, not because he had been ordered to, but because something in the past 12 hours had shifted the geometry between them. The two men didn't speak. They stood and watched Mara come through the door, and something passed between them that was not language. Owen Beck was at his terminal, still compiling the transmission record. He had been offered a break twice. He had declined twice. He would decline a third time before the night was over, because the record he was building was the thing that made everything else solid. And he understood that. And the understanding had given him a purpose that felt more real than anything he had done in the military so far. The room settled when Stroud raised her hand. Not silence. 500 people don't go silent all at once. The biology of it doesn't allow for that, but a settling. A collective lowering of ambient noise, the sound of a large group of people deciding simultaneously to pay attention. Stroud looked across the assembled personnel. 12 hours ago, she said, you stood in this facility's main hangar for the briefing of Operation Northern Sentinel. Some of you have been running that operation in good faith in training areas across this base. Some of you have spent the last several hours in situations that were not what you believed them to be. She paused. All of you deserve to know the truth of what happened here today. Lieutenant Commander Ellison will provide that briefing. She stepped back. The room looked at Mara. 500 people, and the quality of their attention had changed completely since the morning. In the hangar, when Mercer held the trident above his head and the laughter started, the attention had been the attention of a crowd, undifferentiated, collective, feeding on itself. Now it was something else. 500 individual people, each carrying the specific and personal weight of what the last 12 hours had meant to them, each watching a woman they had laughed at or watched others laugh at, and measuring the distance between what they had assumed and what had turned out to be true. Mara stood at the front of the room. She didn't use notes, didn't use the presentation terminal that someone had set up on her right. She looked at the room the way she had looked at it in the hangar, face by face, section by section, and she spoke without preamble. 3 years ago, she said, a unit called Echo 9 was sent to extract American personnel from a compromised research platform in the Barents Sea. 8 operators, 19 hostages. An intelligence liaison named Major Nolan Pierce provided the mission coordinates. The name moved through the room like a current. The coordinates were wrong by design. The unit went into an ambush. We extracted the hostages. We lost 5 people. She said it without decoration, and the absence of decoration made it heavier than any dramatic phrasing would have. My commanding officer was one of them. He was also my husband. His name was Aaron Ellison. Nobody moved. I have spent 3 years gathering evidence against Pierce. Not through official channels, because the same network that provided the false coordinates had compromised enough of those channels that an official investigation would have been buried before it reached the level of a formal review. I built the case independently. Operation Northern Sentinel was designed to draw Pierce's network into motion, because a moving system reveals itself in ways a still system does not. Owen was still typing at his terminal. He had stopped breathing for a moment when she said Aaron's name. He made himself start again. Pierce anticipated the approach, Mara continued. He prepared a counter-operation. He identified a vulnerability in Northern Sentinel's command structure specifically, the dynamic between myself and Sergeant Mercer, and he used that vulnerability as the primary vector for his operation. She paused. Let that word vulnerability do its work in the room. He did not create the dynamic. He used one that already existed. The distinction matters, and I will come back to it. Mercer was looking at the floor. She had been looking at the floor since she said the word vulnerability. And he was not looking up because looking up required him to meet the eyes of 500 people who were now understanding exactly what role he had played in the near failure of everything. And he was not ready for that yet. He would be ready for it. Later, in a different room, with fewer people watching, he would look at exactly what he had done and name it without flinching. But not yet. Pierce sealed Admiral Stroud and the senior command staff in the underground briefing facility, Mara said. He flooded it. His operational plan required the Admiral to authorize a code transfer under duress, the belief being that the instinct to protect her people would override her operational judgment. She refused authorization twice while sitting in 8 inches of water with the water still rising. Stroud, to her left, said nothing. Her expression didn't change. But something in the room shifted at those words, the particular shift that happens when a large group of people simultaneously revises their understanding of a person's character. Facility was accessed through a maintenance crawl space, identified by Sergeant Mercer, Mara said. The extraction team, every person in that facility is alive and accounted for. She paused there. Not for drama, she was not performing this. She paused because what came next required a different kind of attention, and she wanted the transition to be visible. What I have just described is the operational record, she said. What I am about to describe is the institutional record. They are not the same thing. And the difference between them is what this debrief is actually for. The room was very still. Pierce's counter-operation succeeded in its early stages because the command structure of Northern Sentinel was divided before the operation began. That division existed because of choices made in this facility this morning in this building, in front of many of you, that created the operational vulnerability Pierce exploited. She looked across the room. Those choices are on record. All of them. The recording systems in this facility were functioning throughout. The Senior Review Board will have access to every minute of today's operational record. Mercer looked up. He had known this was coming. He had known it in the mountain pass, and in the crawl space, and in the corridor outside the operations center, when he had stood against the wall and tried to find the right words for what he had done. He had known it the way you know things that you have not yet figured out how to carry. He met Mara's eyes across the room. She looked back at him. Sergeant Mercer defied a direct operational order when he advanced his team into the mountain corridor without authorization, she said. His actions contributed to the breach that allowed Pierce's operation to proceed. He also led the extraction of 12 trapped operators under dangerous conditions, made a correct tactical decision that preserved the lives of the hostages in the underground facility, and completed the mission objective despite a shoulder injury that he sustained in the mountain pass and did not report. The room held both of those things simultaneously, the defiance and the service. The failure and the correction and the holding of them was uncomfortable in the specific way that true things are uncomfortable when they refuse to be only one thing. I am not presenting these facts as a balance, Mara said. One does not cancel the other. Both are true. The review board will determine the appropriate consequence for the first. The operational record will preserve the truth of the second. That is how accountability is supposed to work. Mercer had stopped looking at the floor. He was looking at Mara with an expression that was the most unguarded thing any of them had seen on his face in the 20 years he had been on this base, not gratitude. Exactly, because gratitude was too simple for what was moving through him. Something more like the specific, humbling recognition that arrives when a person you wronged refuses to wrong you back, and in refusing makes the original wrong more clearly visible than any punishment could. I want to address something else, Mara said, and her voice changed slightly, not in volume. Not in control, but in the particular quality that voices have when the person using them is moving towards something they have been carrying for a long time. The room leaned in. When I walked into this hangar this morning, made choices about what I disclosed and what I didn't. I wore plain camouflage. I carried no visible rank, no unit identification, no credentials that would immediately establish who I was or what authority I held. Those choices were operationally justified. The integrity of the 3-year case against Pierce required that my identity remain controlled. She paused. They were also choices that placed junior personnel in an impossible position. Owen stopped typing. Petty Officer Owen Beck is 23 years old, Mara said. He arrived at this base 2 weeks ago for his first joint exercise. This morning, he watched a senior sergeant publicly humiliate a person of unknown rank and unknown identity in front of 500 people, and he made the choice that most people make in that situation. He laughed, because the person with the most institutional weight in the room had determined that laughing was the correct response. And 23-year-old Petty Officer Beck did not yet have enough information or enough institutional courage to do otherwise. Owen was completely still at his terminal. That is not a character indictment, Mara said. It is a description of how institutional authority operates when it goes wrong. When the most senior, most decorated, most physically imposing person in a room performs contempt for someone, that performance becomes a social instruction. People follow it not because they are weak or cruel, but because the entire structure of military hierarchy has trained them to read authority's behavior as directional. She paused. That is a design flaw, not in the people in the structure. She looked at Owen directly. Petty Officer Beck subsequently identified the beacon displacement, recognized the secondary transmission, connected it to exercise security credentials, and provided the informational foundation for everything that followed. He did this while being 23 years old, while carrying the weight of a choice he regretted, and while working in an operations center where the most experienced operators in the room had not thought to ask the question he asked. Owen's jaw was working. He was looking at his screen because looking at the room was not something he could manage at this particular moment without losing the composure he was holding by a very thin margin. What he did, Mara said, is what this institution should produce. Not the laughter that was the institution failing. The correction. That is the institution working. Nobody in the room spoke. 500 people in complete silence. Then Stroud moved. She walked from her position at the front of the room to Owen's terminal. She stopped in front of him. He looked up, realized who was standing there, and stood so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. At ease, Stroud said. He tried. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman who has been in 8 inches of cold water for 22 minutes, refused authorization twice, and is now looking at the 23-year-old whose frequency analysis is the reason she is standing here rather than somewhere considerably worse. Good work, Petty Officer, she said. Owen said thank you, ma'am, in a voice that was approximately 60% functional. Stroud nodded, returned to her position. The room released a breath it had been holding. And then something unexpected happened. One of the soldiers near the back of the room, a young Marine, 19 or 20, someone nobody in the front of the room could immediately identify, said, loudly enough to be heard, ma'am, "What happens to Pierce?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Mara looked toward the voice. "Major Pierce is in military custody," she said. The evidence compiled by Petty Officer Beck, cross-referenced with communications intelligence gathered over the past 3 years, is sufficient to support charges across multiple jurisdictions. The process will be handled by the appropriate legal and command authorities. She paused. The answer to your question is the system. The system handles Pierce if the system functions correctly. Part of what today demonstrated is that systems require people who are willing to tell the truth inside them, regardless of the personal cost. Pierce exploited a system that people were too afraid to question. What stopped him was people who asked questions anyway. The young Marine nodded. Sat back. Someone else, a Navy specialist from the middle of the room, said, "The 5 people from Echo 9, the ones who he stopped, and then tried again, will their records be corrected?" Mara was quiet for a moment. "That process has been initiated," she said. "The declassification review that will result from today's investigation will include a formal request for the public recognition of Echo 9's final mission. Whether that recognition takes the form the families deserve is a decision above my authority to make. A beat. I intend to be vocal about what form it should take." The room absorbed that. Then a voice from the left side, Vasquez, Mercer's operator, the one who hadn't nodded in the equipment bay 12 hours ago, when Mercer called Mara a political appointment, said, "Is it true you directed the rescue for 11 hours after you were wounded?" Mara looked toward him. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you evacuate when you were hit?" She was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer was one she had not said aloud in 3 years. And saying it aloud in front of 500 people was a different weight than carrying it alone. Because Aaron was still on the platform, she said. And then because the hostages needed someone who knew the extraction route. And then, because the people I had brought into that operation deserved someone who stayed until it was finished. She paused. There was always a reason. By the time there wasn't a reason anymore, it was over. Vasquez nodded slowly, like someone filing information in a place they intended to keep. Mercer was watching Vasquez. He was thinking about the equipment bay, 12 hours ago, and the way Vasquez had looked at the floor instead of nodding, and the thin margin of a single small act of resistance that had cost the young operator nothing visible but had meant, to Mercer, everything that came after. He owed Vasquez a conversation. Several, probably, later. Now Stroud moved again, this time to the presentation terminal, which she activated with the practiced efficiency of a flag officer who uses presentation terminals the way other people use pens. A document appeared on the screen, a single page, dense with official language, with a header that the front of the room could read clearly. Review Findings Preliminary, Northern Sentinel, Joint Training Center, Black Ridge. The preliminary findings of the Northern Sentinel review, Stroud said, will include the following administrative actions. She read from the document without effect the specific neutrality of a senior officer reading official language aloud, where the neutrality itself is a statement. Sergeant First Class Grant Mercer, relieved of instructor duties pending formal review. Recommended for reassignment to a non-instructional role commensurate with retained technical skills. The review will assess both the operational failures and the conduct during the extraction phase of Northern Sentinel. The room looked at Mercer. He was looking at the screen. His jaw was set. His good shoulder was square. He was holding his injured arm slightly away from his body. And he was doing it with the deliberate stillness of someone who has decided that the only thing left to control is how they stand when the rest has been taken from them. He did not look surprised. He did not look destroyed. He looked like a man receiving information he had already, on some level, prepared for. The review will also examine, Stroud continued, the broader institutional practices at Black Ridge that created the environment in which today's events were possible. Specifically, the culture of authority by intimidation that allowed a senior NCO's judgment to function as a social override on the collective judgment of 500 personnel. She set the document down. That examination will not be conducted quietly. It will not be conducted in a way that protects the institution's public image at the expense of institutional truth. And it will not conclude until every person who remained silent this morning, for whatever reason, has had the opportunity to speak. A silence. Then Cross said from his position near Mercer, "Ma'am, regarding the review of institutional practices, I'd request that the review include an examination of how Northern Sentinel's command assignment was communicated to personnel. Specifically, the decision to withhold Commander Ellison's credentials from the pre-exercise briefing." Every head turned toward Cross. Stroud looked at him. "You're requesting an examination of Commander Ellison's operational choices. I'm requesting an examination of all command decisions that contributed to the environment of this morning," Cross said, with the precise, measured calm of a man who has decided to say the thing he believes regardless of how it lands, including the decision not to introduce Commander Ellison's credentials in advance. That decision contributed to the conditions Sergeant Mercer operated in. He behaved badly. He should be held accountable. I am also suggesting that the institution examine its own role in setting those conditions. The room was very quiet. Stroud looked at Cross for a long moment. Then she looked at Mara. Mara looked at Cross. Something moved across her face, not surprise. Exactly. But the specific expression that arrives when someone does the thing you hoped they might do but couldn't assume they would. "Captain Cross's request is noted," Mara said, and supported. "The decision to manage my credentials as I did was mine. The reasoning was operationally sound, and I would make the same decision again given the same information. The consequences of that decision, the conditions it created for the personnel in this building this morning, are also mine to account for." She paused. "No decision exists without its consequences. That is true for Sergeant Mercer. It is equally true for me." Mercer looked at her. He had not expected that. Nobody in the room had expected that. The particular surprise of watching a person who has been wronged voluntarily include themselves in the accounting, it moved through the room differently than anything else that had been said in the last hour. Stroud made a note, and then Pierce's voice came through the room. Not from a person, from a speaker. Owen had been compiling the transmission record, and in the process had isolated and cleaned a specific audio file, one of Pierce's internal communications from the radar station, transmitted before the blackout, before the arrest, before anything had gone wrong from his perspective. Owen had not planned to play it in the debrief. He had been working with audio cleaning software and his finger had hit the wrong key, and the cleaned file had routed to the room speaker system before he understood what was happening. He reached for the stop control. Mara held up a hand. Pierce's voice, clean and clear, filled the operations center. "The command structure is already divided," Pierce was saying to the vessel offshore, in the confident and detailed tone of a man briefing an operational plan he is certain will succeed. "Mercer is functional, predictable, and aggressively insecure about his authority. Ellison is contained by her own history. She won't push hard enough to close the breach because she still believes the institution can correct itself from inside. By the time she realizes it can't, we'll be at the 2-kilometer mark." The recording ended. The room did not immediately react. 500 people processing the specific sensation of hearing themselves described as pieces in another person's operation, the dehumanizing clarity of it, the way it stripped the morning's events of any ambiguity and revealed them as the mechanical application of one person's will against the grain of everyone else's dignity. Mercer was looking at the speaker, aggressively insecure about his authority. 3 words. 3 true words, in the voice of the man who had used them as an instrument. And the truth of them, the fact that they were accurate, that Pierce had looked at him and seen something real, was somehow worse than if they had been a lie. He had known men who were called things that weren't true and carried those words as evidence of other people's ignorance. He had never been in the position of being called something true by someone who used the truth against him, and discovering that the truth had been visible to the wrong person while remaining invisible to himself. Owen said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, that wasn't." "Leave it," Mara said. She looked at the room. "Pierce believed that I would not push hard enough to close the breach," she said. "He was partly right. I designed Northern Sentinel to expose his network through its own movement. I did not design it to handle the possibility that he had already identified and compromised a vulnerability in my command structure before the operation began." She paused. "That gap in my design contributed to everything that followed. I am responsible for it." She let that sit. "He was also wrong," she said. "He believed my history, Aaron Echo 9, 3 years of invisible work, would contain me. That I would protect the institution's judgment of me over the mission's requirements. He had met enough officers in enough positions to believe that this was how people in my situation behaved." She looked across the room. "He was wrong about that because the people in this room were not wrong about it." Petty Officer Beck ran the frequency analysis. Captain Cross requested a review of command decisions. Sergeant Mercer led the extraction. "None of you did those things because of my record or my history or a medal that hasn't been awarded yet. You did them because the situation required it and you made the choice." She paused. "That is what Pierce didn't account for. Not me, all of you." The room was quiet for a long time. Stroud spoke. "There is one remaining item," she said. She reached into her service jacket, the dry one, spare uniform someone had found, and produced a small case. The kind of case that holds a specific kind of metal. She set it on the table in front of Mara. Mara looked at it. "The Valor Award that was recommended following Echo 9's final operation," Stroud said, "was classified and withheld at the same level as the mission record. The declassification process will take time. This," she indicated the case, "is a personal acknowledgement. Not official, not yet." She paused. 3 years, Mara." Mara looked at the case. She picked it up, opened it, looked at what was inside for a moment. She closed it. "When the declassification goes through," she said, "I'd like this awarded to the families of the 5 people who didn't come home, with a full public record of what they did." Stroud held her gaze. "Can be arranged." "Then I'd like to accept it on their behalf," Mara said. "Not today. When the record is public, when their names are attached to it." The room was absolutely still. Then from somewhere in the middle of the 500, no one later could identify exactly where it started, someone began to clap. Not the performative applause of a formal ceremony. The real kind. The kind that starts because one person's hands move before they make a conscious decision to move them, and other people's hands follow because the feeling in the room has become too large for silence. Spread through the operations center and into the corridor and into the staging area and the equipment bays. And it continued for longer than any of them expected. Because it was carrying more than appreciation, it was carrying the weight of a morning that had started wrong, a day that had almost ended catastrophically, and the complicated, humbling, genuine relief of 500 people who had seen something true. Mercer was not clapping. He was standing with his good hand at his side and his injured arm held carefully and his head slightly bowed. Not in prayer exactly, but in the posture of someone who is absorbing something that doesn't have a simple receptacle. He waited until the room had settled, until the applause had finished and the personnel had begun to move toward the exits, toward their units, toward the long and necessary work of returning to something like normal. He waited until the crowd had thinned enough that moving toward the front of the room didn't require pushing through anyone. Then he walked to the table where the metal case still sat. Mara was talking to Stroud. Cross was nearby. Owen was at his terminal, compiling. Mercer stopped at the table, looked at the case. Then he looked at Mara. She turned from Stroud. He reached into the collar of his uniform and pulled out a chain. On it, his instructor badge. The one that had been with him for 12 years, through 3 deployments, through every course he had taught at Black Ridge, through every moment he had used it consciously or not as evidence of who he was and what he had earned. He held it for a moment, then he set it on the table beside the metal case. "I'm not doing this for theater," he said. "I know how it looks. I'm doing it because I need to start somewhere, and I can't think of anywhere else to start." Mara looked at the badge on the table. Then at him. "What happens now?" he said, "not regarding the badge. Not regarding the review." He meant something larger than that, and they both knew it, and the knowing it was the first honest transaction they had had all day. "Review determines what happens to your rank," she said. "Character determines what you do with whatever rank you have after that." She paused. "I can't tell you what that looks like. Only you know what you're capable of when the performance is gone and all that's left is the choice." He nodded. He picked the badge back up, not returning it to his collar, just holding it. "The Trident," he said this morning. "I knew what I was doing when I grabbed it. I want you to know that I knew. It wasn't an impulse. I saw it. I made a choice since I performed it for the room." His jaw tightened. "I want you to know that because I don't want to explain it away. I want to own exactly what it was." Mara was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry," he said, "for Aaron. For Echo 9. For all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said again. She picked up her field case. Hand-drawn maps went back inside, folded along their old creases. Maps, worn to translucence at the fold lines, every contour line precise, every known hazard marked in red. She closed the case, looked at Mercer one last time. "What you did in the crawl space," she said. "And in the underground facility. And in the mountain pass, getting your people out, that was real. Review will see all of it. Not just this morning." She paused. "Real things are real, Sergeant. The institution is not always good at recognizing that. But the record is." She went through the door. Mercer stood alone at the table for a moment, instructor badge in his hand, the metal case beside him, the operations center slowly emptying around him. Then he set the badge down gently beside the case and walked out into the storm. The storm lasted 31 hours. Black Ridge didn't shut down during it. Military facilities don't shut down for weather, because the weather that shuts down a military facility is usually the same weather that requires a military response, and the circularity of that logic has kept soldiers working through conditions that would ground everything else. Personnel moved between buildings in pairs, the way regulations required in Arctic-level storm conditions. Equipment was secured. The detained contractors were transferred to a hardened holding facility. Pierce sat in his room with his silence and the slowly accumulating weight of what the transmission record was revealing about the full scope of his network. The investigation didn't wait for the storm to end. Couldn't. The evidentiary window, the period during which communications records, physical access logs, and personnel movements could be secured before the normal processes of a large military institution began to overwrite them, was finite. Owen knew this without being told. He had been compiling the transmission record for 6 hours when Cross found him still at the terminal with a cold cup of coffee at his elbow and the particular 1,000-yard focus of someone operating on the knowledge that what they are doing matters and the fear of stopping before it's complete. "When did you last eat?" Cross said. "This morning," Owen said. "Before the hangar." Cross left and came back in 4 minutes with a meal tray, set it on the desk without comment, and looked at the screen. "How much more?" he said. "I've got Pierce's transmissions fully compiled and cross-referenced," Owen said. "Contractor communications are about 60%. There's a third layer older data pre-exercise that I think connects to a network Pierce was running out of 2 other facilities. If that's there, it's in the archive logs from the previous 6 months." He paused. "Maybe another 8 hours." Cross looked at him for a moment. He said, "Then finish it." Owen ate without tasting anything, because his mind was already in the archive logs. And he would tell people later, when he was older, when he had enough perspective to explain it accurately, that those 8 hours at the terminal were the first time in his military career that he understood what it felt like to do exactly the thing you were supposed to do, in exactly the moment it needed to be done, with exactly the skills you had spent years building toward without knowing what for. Found the third layer. It was worse than Pierce had let on. The network Pierce had been running didn't start with Northern Sentinel. Didn't start with Echo 9. It went back 7 years, through 3 other defense contractors, 2 overseas facilities, and a series of access code transfers that had compromised navigation systems used in 4 separate operational theaters. 5 of those compromises had resulted in mission failures. Two of those failures had resulted in casualties. Echo 9 was not the beginning. Echo 9 was the moment someone survived long enough to look back at all of it. When Owen brought the full picture to Mara, she was in the secondary conference room with Stroud and two officers from the Judge Advocate General's office, who had been flown in as soon as the storm allowed. She read the complete record in 12 minutes. She read it without expression. The way you read things you have been preparing yourself to know but didn't fully know until now. Didn't she down? 7 years, she said. Yes, ma'am, Owen said. The casualties from the two mission failures in the third theater. Do the families know what happened? The official record lists both as training accidents, Owen said quietly. She was quiet for a long time. Stroud was watching her. JAG officers were watching her. Owen was watching her, because he had discovered this and brought it to her, and he needed to know what to do with what it meant, and she was the person he had learned, in the past 24 hours, to bring that kind of question to. This goes into the full record, Mara said. Every family gets the truth. Every mission failure gets a correct accounting. That is not a request, it is a condition of my continued cooperation with the review process. She looked at Stroud. I will not participate in a review that corrects the record for Echo 9, while leaving other families with a false one. Stroud held her gaze. Ditton said. Stroud nodded once. One of the JAG officers was already typing. Owen looked at Mara. She looked back at him. You found this, she said. For the second time in 2 days. In the same tone, not praise. Exactly, because Mara didn't do praise as performance. Just the plain, direct acknowledgement of a true thing stated clearly. All of it. 7 years of it. You found it. You told me to keep running the analysis, he said. Kept running it. That's yours. He nodded. He was 23 years old, and he had laughed in a hangar 2 days ago. And he had spent every hour since trying to make the arithmetic come out differently. And sitting in that room with a complete evidentiary record on the screen beside him, he understood for the first time that the arithmetic didn't need to come out differently. What you did after the mistake was its own thing. It didn't erase the mistake. It was just its own thing, with its own weight, standing beside the mistake in the record of who you were. He could live with that. He thought maybe that was the point. The formal review board convened on the 4th day after Northern Sentinel, when the storm had fully cleared and the transferred personnel had returned, and the facility had achieved the particular kind of quiet that follows the resolution of a crisis not peaceful. Exactly. Because too much had happened for peace to arrive quickly, but functional, operational, the quiet of people who have work to do and are doing it. The review board had 3 items before it. The first was Pierce. This moved fastest, because the evidentiary record was complete, and the legal framework was clear, and the scope of the network Owen had uncovered meant that the relevant authorities were motivated in ways that bureaucratic processes rarely produce. Pierce's preliminary hearing lasted 4 hours. He retained counsel and said nothing substantive, which was his right. The record said everything that needed to be said without his participation. Second item was Mercer. This moved more slowly, because it was more complicated, and because complicated things deserve to move slowly when people's lives are being decided. Mercer testified for 3 hours. He answered every question directly, without counsel, which was not required of him and which the board noted. He did not minimize what he had done. He did not amplify it either. He did not perform contrition the way some officers perform it, theatrically, laying the self-flagellation on thick enough that the board feels implicated in cruelty if they pursue accountability. He simply answered questions about what he had done and why and what the consequences had been, in the flat, factual tone of someone who has already had the internal reckoning and is now providing the external account. At the end of his testimony, the board's senior member, a 2-star general named Hollis, whom Mercer had never met before that morning, looked at him across the table and said, "Is there anything you want to add that the record doesn't currently contain?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. "Sir," he said. "Go ahead." The culture at Black Ridge that allowed what happened in the hangar to happen the way a senior NCO's behavior functions as a social instruction to the personnel around him. I contributed to that culture for 20 years. Not always in ways as visible as the hangar, sometimes in smaller things. The look you give a junior person when they ask a question you think is obvious. The way you talk about support personnel when operators are the only ones in the room. The standard you hold people to based on what they look like when they walk through the door. He paused. I taught a lot of people things about what authority looks like. Some of what I taught was useful. Some of it made the institution worse. The review should examine both, not just the hangar. General Hollis looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. The board's decision came 3 days later. Mercer was relieved of his instructor position permanently, which was the expected outcome and the appropriate one. He was reduced 1 grade in rank, which was contested by 2 of the board's 5 members not because they disagreed on the accountability, but because they disagreed on the weight the extraction and the underground facility operation should carry in the balance. The reduction stood 3-2. He was not separated from the service. The 3-2 decision on that question had been influenced, significantly, by a written statement submitted to the board by Mara Ellison. It was 2 pages. It detailed in specific operational terms what Mercer had done in the mountain pass, in the crawl space, in the underground facility, and in the corridor outside the operations center. It was not advocacy for leniency. It was an operational record, complete and factual, and it included everything: the defiance and the injury and the correct tactical decision and the apology offered without expectation of forgiveness. The board read it as the complete record of a complicated person, which it was. Mercer learned about the statement 3 weeks later from Cross, who had seen the board documentation. He had not known it existed until then. Mara had not mentioned it. He sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then he wrote her a letter. 2 sentences: I know what you submitted. Don't know how to be adequate to that, but I intend to spend time finding out. He didn't know if she received it before her next assignment took her somewhere he didn't have clearance to know about. Sent it anyway, because some things need to be sent regardless of whether they arrive in time. The institutional changes at Black Ridge moved faster than institutional changes usually move, which was a direct result of Stroud's specific and deliberate application of pressure at every level that could generate friction. He had sat in 8 inches of cold water for 22 minutes and refused a compromised authorization twice. And she emerged from that experience with the particular clarity of someone who has been shown, in the most visceral terms, exactly what it costs when institutions protect their image over their integrity. The first change was structural, a formal reporting channel, independent of the chain of command, through which personnel could report safety concerns, ethical violations, and institutional misconduct without routing the report through the officers involved. It was not a revolutionary idea. It existed in various forms in various branches. What made it different at Black Ridge was that Stroud insisted on the channel being actively used, not available, not technically compliant, but used with regular audits of the submissions and a formal requirement that every submission receive a documented response within 72 hours. The second change was curricular. Joint training exercises at Black Ridge would henceforth begin with a mandatory module on command authority and institutional trust, not taught by the most senior instructor available, but co-taught by personnel from multiple specialties, including communications specialists, medics, logistics personnel, and at least 1 junior enlisted member per cohort. Module's explicit objective was to teach operators and senior NCOs to recognize expertise in forms they were not accustomed to valuing. It was Owen Beck who helped design the curriculum. He was 23 years old and had never designed a curriculum before. He also had the most recent and operationally relevant experience of any person at Black Ridge of what it looked like when expertise was dismissed and what it cost. The curriculum design team found his contributions useful in the specific way that direct experience is useful, not polished. Not theoretical but true. The third change was the one took longest and mattered most. The families of the 2 service members whose deaths had been listed as training accidents in the 3rd Theater, the deaths Owen's extended analysis had revealed, were formally notified. Correct record was provided. The apology came from Stroud directly, in person, in 2 separate visits to 2 separate states, because she had decided that some things should not be done by letter or by staff officer proxy. He took Cross with her on both visits. He asked her, on the flight back from the 2nd visit, why she had brought him rather than someone more senior. Because you asked for the review of command decisions, she said. In the operations center, in front of 500 people, you asked a question that made the institution accountable instead of just Mercer. I wanted you to see what accountability looks like when it goes all the way. Cross was quiet for a long moment. Did it help? He said. The visits for the families, Stroud said. I don't know. The truth after a long time is complicated. It doesn't undo anything. But it's theirs. They deserve to have it. She paused. For me, yes, it helped. She looked out the window. Mara told me once, Stroud said, that the hardest part of Echo 9 wasn't the platform or the ambush or the 11 hours. The hardest part was the years afterward when the truth was classified and the families had a false record, and she couldn't tell them anything true because the operational security protocols required her silent. She paused. She said, silence that protects an institution at the expense of a family's truth is not operational security. It's institutional cowardice dressed in the right language. Cross absorbed that. Said that to you? 3 years ago, Stroud said, when she first came to me with the beginning of the case against Pierce. before Northern Sentinel existed as a plan, when it was just a woman with evidence and a request for a framework that would let the truth surface without being buried again. The plane flew north. Why, Hercross said. For Northern Sentinel, there were other ways to expose Pierce. Other operators, other frameworks. Why specifically her? Stroud looked at him. Because she had already survived the worst version of what Pierce could do, Stroud said. And she had spent 3 years turning that survival into something useful, instead of something consuming. That's rare. A pause, and because she was right about the institution. About what it costs when authority is built on intimidation instead of competence. She was right 3 years ago, and Northern Sentinel proved it. And I needed someone who was willing to prove it in a way the institution couldn't dismiss. Cross nodded slowly. She took the risk, he said. She accepted it, Stroud said. There's a difference. Taking a risk suggests you might not know what it costs. Accepting it means you do. 6 weeks after Northern Sentinel, Mara came back to Black Ridge. Not permanently, she was between assignments, the specific kind of between that classified work produces, where the previous mission has concluded and the next one exists but hasn't been formally authorized yet, and there is a window of days or weeks that feels neither like rest nor like work, but like the space between one kind of breathing and another. She came back because there were things unfinished. Not operationally, the review board had concluded. The charges against Pierce were moving through the appropriate process. The institutional changes were underway. What was unfinished was smaller and more personal, and in some ways more important than any of that. She went to Owen's new assignment first. He had been transferred to the Secure Communications Training Program not as a student, which was what everyone initially assumed, but as a junior instructor, which was what Stroud had pushed for, and what Owen had agreed to, with the particular combination of gratitude and terror that comes from being given more than you expected and less than you know how to hold yet. He was mid-lesson when Mara appeared at the back of the training room. Saw her, lost his place in the material for exactly 3 seconds, found it again, and finished the lesson without acknowledging her, which was the correct choice and which she noted. Afterward, in the corridor, he said, I heard they gave you another assignment. Pending authorization, she said. Classified? Almost certainly, he nodded. He was looking at her with the expression he had worn in the operations center on the first day, the one that was working out how to say the thing he actually meant, rather than the thing that was easier. I laughed, he said in the hangar. I know I said it before, but I keep coming back to it because I knew it felt wrong. In the moment I knew, and I laughed anyway. Yes, she said. How do you stop doing that, he said. How do you make the choice that costs something when everything in the room is pointing you the other direction? She looked at him for a moment. You practice the smaller version, she said. Every time the situation is lower stakes and you still make the honest choice, you build the muscle. By the time the high-stakes moment arrives, the muscle is there. She paused. You also forgive yourself for the times you didn't, because carrying that weight on every future decision makes you slower, not better. You ran 8 hours of archive analysis in a storm, she said, because it was the right thing to do. That's the muscle. You're already building it, he nodded. She held out her hand. He shook it, and it occurred to him in the handshake that this was not ceremonial. She was not presenting him with something. She was meeting him as a peer, which was a different gesture entirely, and one that he would understand more fully in time. He found Mercer at the physical rehabilitation facility on the base's east side. He was working with a young sailor who had lost partial mobility in his right hand after an equipment injury, a painstaking, repetitive, deeply unglamorous process of rebuilding fine motor function through exercises that produced incremental progress measured in millimeters and degrees. Mercer was guiding the sailor's hand through a grip exercise with the specific, focused patience of someone who has learned, recently and expensively, that the things worth doing are not always the things that look like progress from the outside. He looked up when Mara came through the door. He said something quiet to the sailor. Two nodded and continued the exercise independently. Mercer stood and moved to where she was standing, and they went into the corridor. And neither of them said anything for a moment, because the corridor outside a rehabilitation facility is a specific kind of space quiet, functional, stripped of performance that makes certain kinds of conversation easier. You got it, I got it. She paused. The 2 Sentinel, he said. I know you did, she said. That's why I'm here, he looked at her. Aaron's Trident, she said. She reached into her jacket, held it out. The chain had been repaired, a clean repair. The right gauge of metal done carefully. The scratches were untouched. Every one of them exactly as they had been, because erasing them would have been the wrong kind of correction. Mercer looked at it. I had the chain fixed, he said. I didn't touch anything else, I know, she said. Can see that I wanted to. He started again. I thought about getting the body polished, making it look like new. But it's not new. And those scratches are, he stopped again. They're his, she said. Yes, she held it there, in her open palm between them. You asked me once, she said, whether I thought you still belonged in uniform. In the corridor, before the operations center debrief. I remember I told you belonging was a daily choice, she said. I meant that. I still mean it. She paused, but I want to add something I didn't say then. He waited. You were wrong about me in the hangar, she said. Completely, visibly, publicly wrong. And then you were wrong again in the mountain pass. And then for a moment in the operations center during the crisis you tried to be wrong a third time. She held his gaze. And then you stopped. You got into a crawl space with a broken shoulder, and you brought 11 people and one admiral out of a flooding room. And then you stood up in front of 500 people and told them exactly what you had done and exactly what it cost. She paused. That is not nothing, Sergeant. That is not a small thing. The institution is full of people who have never done anything as hard as what you did on that fourth day. Mercer was very still. I am not telling you this to make you feel better, she said. I'm telling you because the record should be complete. You carry what you did wrong. You should also carry what you did right. Both of them, not one without the other. He took the trident from her palm. He held it for a moment, the weight of it, the specific temperature of metal that has been held and then not held and then held again. Scratches that his thumb found, without looking, because they were the texture of the thing, and the texture was the truth of it. He held it out to her. She took it. Does it get easier, he said. Carrying it. The whole thing, the weight doesn't get lighter, she said. You get better at knowing which hand to hold it in, he nodded. Slowly. The way people nod when they're not agreeing so much as filing something away in a place they intend to keep. Where are you going, he said. The next assignment. I can't tell you that. Will it be like this? She almost smiled. It will be what it is, she said. That's the only answer I have. He looked at her for a long moment. Aaron was lucky, he said, to have someone who carried it this way. She looked back at him. He was the one who showed me how, she said. She went through the door and back out into the cold Alaskan morning. The trident against her chest, the field case in her hand. Aaron's maps inside it folded along their old creases. Every contour line precise, every known hazard marked in red. The handwriting of a meticulous man who understood that good information saved lives and had spent his life proving it. The final formation at Black Ridge was held on a clear morning 3 days after Mara returned. The storm had left the air with the particular sharpness that follows sustained weather clean. Cold, almost painfully clear, the kind of morning that makes everything visible. 500 personnel in formation. The same 500 who had stood in the hangar and watched Mercer hold the trident above his head and erupt in laughter. They were not the same people they had been that morning, not because a single event changes people completely, but because what had happened between that morning and this one had given each of them information they would carry for the rest of their careers. And information changes how you see, and how you see changes what you do. Stroud stood at the reviewing platform. She did not invite Mara to stand above the formation on the platform. She stepped down from the platform herself, and Cross stepped down beside her, and the two of them joined the formation on the same level as the 500, because Stroud had decided that the gesture the moment required was not elevation, but equality, not a commander presenting an officer to troops, but an institution recognizing that one of its members had seen it clearly when it was not seeing itself. Mara stood at the front of the formation. She was wearing her uniform and Aaron's trident. She was not wearing the Valor Award. That ceremony was still pending, still waiting for the full declassification, for the moment when the 5 names could be spoken publicly, with the record they deserved attached to them. She would not wear it before then. She had been clear about that. No one had argued. She looked across the formation. 500 faces, some of them she knew. Owen in the 3rd row, standing with the straightness of someone who has decided how they want to inhabit a uniform. Vasquez, near the back, who had looked at the floor instead of nodding, and who had been looking at the floor in a different way ever since. Cross beside Stroud, steady and present and honest in the particular way that made him the rarest kind of officer. And Mercer at the far left end of the front row. He was in a junior position, not the position he had held the morning Northern Sentinel began, not the front and center of the most decorated senior instructor. A different position, a starting again position. He was holding it with the same physical steadiness he brought to everything, because his body hadn't learned yet to hold itself differently. But his face had learned something. Something that 20 years of performed certainty had covered over, and 48 hours of consequence had uncovered. He was looking at her. She looked back at him. Then she looked at all of them, the whole formation. The whole of what they were and what they had been and what they were in the process of deciding to become, and she spoke. 3 days ago, she said, this facility held a formal review of the events of Operation Northern Sentinel. The review produced findings, administrative actions, and institutional recommendations. Those are on record and accessible to the appropriate personnel through the appropriate channels. She paused. What is not on the formal record, what cannot be, because it belongs to each of you individually rather than to the institution, is what you carry from what happened here. The formation was completely still. You were in a hangar when someone performed contempt for a person they didn't know, she said. Some of you laughed. Some of you looked away. Some of you were silent when silence cost something. Some of you told the truth when telling it was dangerous. Some of you made choices you are proud of. Some of you made choices you are not. She looked across them. All of that is yours. The institution will process what it can process. The rest belongs to you a beat. I am not here to tell you what to do with it, she said. I am not qualified to prescribe how another person carries their own accounting. But I will tell you what I know from carrying mine. She paused. The question is never whether you belonged somewhere at the beginning, she said. Muklan is whether you earn it every day after. Not through performance. Not through the right insignia or the right record or the right reputation. Through what you actually do when it costs something to do it right. She looked across the formation one final time. Belonging is not granted. It is every day, in the small decisions that nobody records and the large ones that everybody sees, in the moments when the room is pointing you one direction and the truth is pointing another. In all of those moments, you choose who you are. She was quiet for a moment. Choose carefully, she said. The people beside you are counting on it. The formation held the silence for 3 full seconds. Then Stroud called the command. 500 voices responded in unison, crisp, clean. The particular sound of a formation that is not performing precision but actually achieving it, because something in the air that morning made the difference between the two things legible. Mara picked up her field case. She walked off the formation ground without looking back. Because looking back was not the kind of thing she did, not out of hardness, not out of ceremony, but because the next thing always required the same full attention as the last thing, and dividing that attention was a luxury she had learned. Significant cost she could not afford. Aaron's trident was warm against her chest. Maps were in the case. His handwriting was on every page, precise, meticulous. The hand of a man who had understood that the difference between a good map and a bad one was the difference between the people who came home and the people who didn't, and who had spent his life drawing good ones. She had carried his trident for 3 years. She would carry it for the rest of her career, not as grief, not as performance, not as evidence of what she had lost, as a reminder of what he had known and taught her, and left her with when he ran out of time to carry it himself, that the only thing a person truly owns is what they do when everything else has been stripped away, and that this, in the end, is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. That is what makes someone real.